Master Gunnery Sergeant Stalker tonight. Master Gunnery Sergeant Scott H. Stalker became the command senior enlisted leader of United States Space Command on the 28th of August 2020. He is a native of Lebanon, New Hampshire, and has served as the command senior enlisted leader for the National Security Agency, Defense Intelligence Agency, and United States Cyber Command. He earned the title Marine on the 20th of January 1993. Master Gunnery Sergeant Stalker is a Marine Raider and Special Operation Capability Specialist. He graduated from numerous courses in intelligence, leadership, and defense. He has a Bachelor in Intelligence Analysis, a Master in Cybersecurity, and a Graduate Certificate in Leadership from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Master Gunnery Sergeant Stalker is a 2022 Senior Fellow with the Irregular Warfare Initiative. Additionally, he is an Advisory Board Director for the Cybersecurity Forum Initiative and member of the Board of Advisors for the Military Cyber Professional Association. Master Gunnery Sergeant Stalker served the U.S. Army in different countries, including Iraq, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Somalia, Democratic Republic of Congo, Albania, and Japan. Having served in a variety of theaters with multiple combat tours and contingency operations, Master Gunnery Sergeant Stalker's awards, badges, devices, and decorations are consistent with those of most Marines who have had the honor to serve the U.S. over a period of decades and the good fortune to return home safely. Thank you for joining us to talk, Mr. Stalker.
Tristan, thank you. Thank you very much. You could have said, this is Scott and he's a Marine, and that would have been a good enough intro for me. Thank you for everyone joining. Matilda and Tristan, thank you for the invitation and the honor to speak today. What I thought I would do today is talk a little bit about the history of space, where we are in the United States Space Command, which I'm not in. I'm in the Marine Corps, but I'll touch on that. And then what both from the challenges, I think more importantly, the opportunities, because there are a lot of opportunities out there. And then I'll cut it short, and then we'll get into some questions and answers. So let me start by framing this importance by saying space is not new. And I mean that from a perspective of humans in space. We had the first human in space in 1961, several decades ago. And then we had the first man on the moon in 1969. This is not something new. However, it is becoming more of a booming opportunity for industry and academia, which is why we're evolving and why we're moving out at a rapid pace. But rewinding that, I'd like to frame this because as a member of the Army Marine Corps and the military in the United States, I'm heavily focusing on space and how we can increase opportunities, Space Command, how we can deter aggression and defend if necessary. And so there was an individual born in Nice, France, named Billy Mitchell. And Billy Mitchell's father had served in the United States in the American Civil War. Billy ended up serving in the United States Army. He commanded all air combat units in World War I. And when he came back, he later advocated for increased investments in air power and increased opportunities for aircraft, bombers specifically, to sink battleships. The powers that be back then did not think of maritime domain as one where what they called flying kites, now we know as airplanes or jets, would be sinking maritime vessels, battleships. And so they thought that Billy was crazy. He didn't know what he was thinking about. He didn't understand the domain. And so they ended up doing a variety of things. One, they demoted him. They also court-martialed him, and he ended up leaving in shame. But Billy wrote, before he left, he wrote a 324-page report. And in it, he outlined how he believed Japan would attack Pearl Harbor. He got it precisely right, the day and moment of it happening. And so I talk about Billy Mitchell often because he looked at air and sea differently and objectively, whereas the leadership then viewed air and sea basically fighting it from the previous war. Billy wanted to look into the future. I think that's where we are today. And there's a lot of lessons we can learn from Billy Mitchell as it relates to space today and cyberspace. We've got to think differently. We need to unleash the brilliant minds of the folks that are on the net today in academia and industry so that we are prepared to hopefully, but if need be, we can fight and win in that domain in both space and cyberspace. So I think it's important for us to not think of it as new and unique, and also has been done before, just in different domains. So we got to think differently. So when was space first used in war? Well, some will tell you Desert Storm. You've heard folks say that that was the first space war. They're wrong, and they're wrong by decade. First used in Vietnam, in the Vietnam War, where we used it for basic satellite communications, and that allowed us to communicate over distance through terrain. It wasn't as graded as it is today, but it was first used then, and we also use it for a little bit of meteorological support and getting the weather to our warfighters on the ground. It then became obviously used in greater effects in Desert Storm, where we not only used it for satellite communications, but we used it for command and control. And then we introduced what some called one of the offset munitions, which smart bombs, basically where you had a GPS-enabled weapon system able to hit a precision target. And so that is thought of, quite frankly, as the first space war. Again, I think it's a little bit late to need there. Interestingly enough, prior to that happening, we had Space Command had stood up in 1985, and so Space Command, as it exists today, is quite different. We had it, but back then it was a fairly benign environment. The Soviet Union, the United States would pretty much put a satellite up there. We did another. There wasn't at the time direct-to-send ASAT missile testing, where we were blowing things up in space, and did our thing as Americans. The Soviet Union did theirs, and it was kind of left alone. Space Command was dissolved after 9/11, and after that happened, the United States looked inward and said, we need a combatant command, a headquarters focused on homeland defense. And so at that point, was dual-hatted as the commander of Northern Command right here in Colorado Springs, and we command, and Space Command stood down. Talked about when I joined Space Command. I joined the command on the 20th of August of 2020, which is 364 days before it existed. So it stood up 19th of August of 2019, and that's our second one. Interestingly enough, and what's confusing about this is a few months later, on the 20th of December of 2019, the Space Force stood up. And so we had both a combatant, familiar with that, I'll talk about what that is, and then we had a service, United States Space Force, created. And so the Space Force was created to what we call organize, train, and equip. So to bring in talent, individuals focused on space. If you can see right here, you see Marines on it. Theirs would say Space Force. And then they would provide those people, those individuals, to combatant commanders, which is the structure we have in the United States. And those combatant commanders, Weapons Command, Central Command, and whose force released, Indo-PACOM, which Indo-Pacific, or so on and so forth. The Space Force would provide those forces to that combatant commander. Initially, as it so happened, most of those individuals, what we call guardians, Space Force guardians, fell under Space Command. Space Command is commanded by an Army general, my boss, General James Dickinson, and he has the authority, what we call 100 kilometers and above the Earth, where space begins, and where it ends, we don't know. And he has the authorities to do what we call command and control, and other warfighting-like effects in space. And so that's the difference between the Space Force and the Space Command. It was made confusing. We had, political conversations about, is it necessary, and so on and so forth. That's not my lane to tell you whether it's necessary or not. I'll tell you that it exists, And let me tell you why I think it is important that we have both a combatant command and a service focused on this. In 2007, China launched a direct descent ASAT missile into space, and they took out one of their satellites. It left a lot of debris. On the 15th of November last year, the Russians did the same thing. Now, to be fair, the United States has also launched a direct descent ASAT missile into space. But here's the difference, and here's why I think it matters. Is when we did this several years ago, we didn't leave any debris. Today, there is still debris from when China did that test, and then last year when Russia did that test. And so we're working through our diplomatic means, the United Nations, so that we can have a safe and secure environment where anyone, any company, any nation state can place capabilities into space. But we have to make sure we have our nations that are not necessarily blowing things up in space and causing damage. And so there's a term that I think we all. And the reason this term is important is because the number one priority for my commander and Space Command right now is space domain awareness. And so we've got to be able to see, characterize, and understand everything that's going on in space, so that if the President of the United States, our allies and partners, the Secretary of Defense, or commercial enterprise needs something, General Dickinson can aid with that decision. And so space domain awareness is increasingly important. And as more and more industry place objects in space, as more and more nations place objects in space, which is their right to do, one of the concerns we have, are you familiar with? If not, I'd invite you to dig into it, is what we call the Kessler effect. And the Kessler effect is really theory, but it's not so much a theory because it can absolutely happen. And so if you think back to 2007 or last year on the 15th of November when those missile tests happened, if a piece of debris at that point had broken off and it's traveling around the Earth at roughly 17,000 miles an hour, if one of those pieces of debris had hit the International Space Station, if they had hit another satellite, we could potentially have a Kessler effect where one satellite is taken out because of a piece of debris, which leaves greater debris, and then more and more debris is created and takes out other things, soon taking us back to potentially the 1940s, 1950s, where we have no space-based capabilities. Economy of the globe that would harm certainly our commercial partners. It would challenge us to do basic things, access the internet, make a phone call, even do something as basic and simple as this. And so we're very concerned with nations taking out, leaving debris there in an irresponsible manner. And that's something that we continue to keep an eye on. Other things that we're focused on, we obviously want a free and open Indo-Pacific. You may recall several years ago, Xi Jinping, the president of China, made a decision to rebuild some of these man-made islands in the Indo-Pacific. And when he did that, he made the promise that, hey, we're not going to militarize those man-made islands. I'm not going to share anything classified with you, but if you look at several, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or any open source information that's out there, you'll see that not only were those islands militarized, but the concern we have as well is they understood that the United States operates and our partners and allies operate using space capabilities. And so there was a lot of satellite communication jammers that are on those islands. And so at the time and place of their choosing, if they so desire, if the United States, a commercial vessel, whatever, were to go into that area, they could jam and make their capabilities null and void. And so that's a concern we have as well going in there. It's not necessarily just the capabilities that are, it's also what's on the ground, and those jamming capabilities, those anti-satellite capabilities are able to bring you direct TV so you can watch the World Cup, make a phone call, or access the internet, or do the basic thing. If you imagine a world without space, you can't just think of the things that are in space. You've all piece, and then the link that goes between ground station up to the down to the end user. If you can jam that piece of information as well. We have great concerns there. And so there's obviously capabilities, commercial off-the-shelf products that you and I can buy, and there's nation states that do that as well, that keep us up at night and have us concerned. It was often used prior to space being thought of as a domain where military operations are taking place. We often heard of this whole of government approach to addressing issues. And that was kind of an idea thought of when we talked about air, land, and sea, having a whole of government approach. I would offer to you that that is no longer applicable in space and cyberspace. It is now a whole of society approach, heavily focused on industry and academia and our partners and allies. The United States will not and cannot go alone in any conflict or any negotiation. And so our partners and allies are critical. What industry has been able to do, my goodness, we can about that alone. When SpaceX was told you'll never be able to land one of your rocket boosters, they not only have done that, they have exceeded what they said they would do, which is to reuse it 10 times. They've been able to do that multiple times. And now they're looking at the second stage booster as well, and how they can land that and reuse that. You think of the monetary gain, the opportunities to reuse all of those platforms. It's incredible. And you know, it's a kind of akin to anytime a plane takes off, if you would just throw it in the trash. Well, SpaceX has found a way to not only reuse that aircraft in this scenario, but to continue to press forward and find even greater ways of doing that. And so industry and academia are not so much caught up in some of the intergovernmental bureaucracy. They're able to move faster. And as long as we unleash them, the opportunities and capabilities going forward. There's a couple of things that industry is talking about putting out there soon. And so I talked about debris in space and how we're tracking so many. Today alone, Space Command is tracking over 45,000 objects in space. Whether that's a satellite or a piece of debris, we're tracking it. And as it moves around the Earth at excess of 17,000 miles an hour. And that can be in LEO, that can be in GEO, that can be in MEO, in any of those orbits. So low Earth orbit, medium Earth, geosynchronous Earth orbit. And I can talk specifics about that if you'd like as well. But we track that debris. Industry has said to launch a capability soon. So kind of think of the garbage man, the garbage person, if you will, that can go into space, remove that trash, and either take it out to greater orbits or bring it back to Earth. However, they're going to do that. And so industry is said that they can do this. They're going to launch that capability soon. As most things are, it always comes down to the dollar, if you will, or who's going to pay for that. And so that's something to be seen. Other things that industry about is the life of a satellite and how do we extend that. And you know, it used to be before you'd put something in space, it would last for 5 to 10 years, and then it would die, and hopefully it would return to Earth responsibly. It would burn up, or potentially it would move out to further orbits. And now we are finding that think of a gas station in space. Industry is talking about how they're going to put quote unquote a gas station in space so that we can extend the life of satellites. And so satellites being built today are probably going to have connections and capabilities that can hook up to this gas station, if you will, and then extend the life of them. That's all led by industry, started by academic brilliant students, and then bringing their ideas to industry. And so we need more and more of that. And so I'll end with this, and then I'd love to get into some Q&A here. Why is there such a boom on space? Why now? Why are we doing this? Is it because the United States wants to get into space? Is this because our partners and allies want to get in space? Is this because we want to put objects on Mars? But I'll bring you back to my comment a moment ago. It's about the dollar. It's about the euro. It's about whatever your monetary gain is. Tremendous amount of potential opportunity in space from precious metals and resources. If they can be mined. And I pulled up just some basic ones out there. You think of iron, nickel. So think of everything today running on batteries. Well, there's potentially an endless amount of nickel in space, whether that's on an asteroid or another planet or the moon, you name it, to mine that. Cobalt, not just for airbags, but other options out there, but there's an unknown amount of cobalt there. Gold, magnesium, iridium, and it goes on and on. And so there's not just this desire to get to vegetables. The reality of it is there's tremendous and unknown economic opportunities. Some would say in the trillions of dollars. And so at some point, we're going to reach an end of what we can mine here on Earth and removing those precious metals and resources. But that demand may not die. And so there's a potential that this will be done on the moon, on asteroids, you name it. I said I would end there, but I actually failed to mention a couple things that I want to go into, and that's the United States Space Command and what we are focusing on. We heavily partner with our allies, and so we have other nations that have studied space. A few years ago, NATO came out with the Space Center of Excellence, and we're working with them in their efforts. We work command and NATO to make sure they need. Can you hear me now, Tristan?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
Someone threw me backstage. I got thrown off the stage for a moment. So I apologize to that team, but I'm back. And so what I was talking about is Space Command and where we're at today. Heavily focusing on our partners and allies. I had mentioned that NATO had recently stood up the Space Center of Excellence, and the United States Space Command is in support of European Command and NATO where they need support for Ukraine as they continue to fight Russia. We're also looking at issues and challenging sure that our partners and allies out there and the commander of INDOPACOM has these capabilities open Indo-Pacific and necessary. Keep saying I'm having issues here, but anyways, those abilities are there. And so again, we have United States Space Command here, headquarters in Colorado. We have Marines, soldiers, civilians, all of the above, and Space Force Guardians on our headquarters as well. And let me see. I think those are the key bits that I wanted to talk about. Let me end with where we are today, and that is recently Artemis launched up. I just got a note saying a bad feed. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, yes.
Okay. Someone had a bad feed there. Apologize for the connections. We just got some snow here in Colorado Springs. I don't know if that's causing anything. But program. I was recently out there at Cape Canaveral in Florida and got to get up close and personal with the largest rocket ever created by human. Incredible to see that they finally got that off. We had some challenges, but that's not something you want to get 99% right. You want to get that 100% right before you launch that. And so that program today is circling around the moon. It'll return to Earth here in a few days. We will study that. Audio is in and out. I apologize. Let me see here. Working dogs, I think, is something that you know, is a long thing. I don't know if it's this platform or what. How you hearing me?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. I'm not sure I can hear you. I'm sorry for like all the inconvenience we have for the talk. I think we experienced like internet connections issues. So okay.
Matilda sent a text that she can hear everyone.
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, bottom line on the military working dogs is I think we got to be able to test humans and see, not test humans, but get humans on Mars and the moon, and see how we can logistically supply them, and then potentially there. But I think we're a long ways away from that. How can we get an entire generation invested in space? You know, this is the question. This is the important. Okay.
I think I can hear you now again. I think you cut.
Okay. Okay.
So if you could answer a question again. I'm not sure the audience heard your response to it.
Okay. You got me? Okay. So, yeah, I think, you know, I talked about invested in space. This is a whole society approach. This is not just me or NASA. This is not Tristan or Matilda. This is everyone. And inspiration comes from different methods and means. It could be economic. Well, there's certainly a lot of economic opportunities out there. If you want to start your own company and do certain things, that opportunity exists. If you're interested in cyber, if you're interested in the intelligence and national security opportunities, commercial industry, you name it. We've got to be able to tell our young people all of the opportunities that are out there, and then show them the path, mentor them, coach them along the way. As folks are challenged by maybe math or science, let them know that many of us have been challenged there. There's a way to break through that and to continue to press on and to achieve your goals. And so it's going to take more and more effort from everybody, and a true passion. This is something that I love to do and talk about. And so any opportunities I can to do that, I take it on. How do I see the future evolution of nuclear safety in space when it comes to testing and weapon development? Well, right now there are very few treaties in space, but that's one that exists where nuclear testing is something that as a globe, if you went on to nuclear, we're not going to be testing nuclear weapons in space. I don't speak for anyone else but myself, and I can say that I would imagine that most people would like to see us not conducting nuclear weapons testing in space. That a huge problem. And so when it comes to testing and weapon development, what we're looking at today is using things like virtual reality and simulations and models and that type of thing, where we can get a great idea of what would happen in space without actually doing that. That's a cost saving method, but it's also a way to be responsible in space. And so I hope that we continue to do models and simulations, not just for weapons testing, but for other testing as well, to include how we maybe grow in space and that sort of thing. So it's both an economic opportunity, but an opportunity to do things safely and smartly. As from Andrew here, as far as industry collaborating with the United States Space Command, what are the best channels to do so outside of SBIR and SITR, or through getting past the phase 2, phase 3 valley of death? Okay. I think the best way initially I would offer, there's probably two ways. One, if you can, Andrew, I would invite you and offer you an opportunity to consider coming to the Space Symposium, which is annually held at the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs. And so you can look that up and find when that opportunity exists for you to attend the Space Symposium, or someone from your organization to do that. That is one. The other way is to connect with us or check our webpage and reach out to us so that we connect, and then getting your solution, your idea to our J8, which is focused on industry engagement and industry engagement and acquisitions, so that we can talk through what your potential solution to a problem is, or program, or whatever you have, and get that in front of our folks to brief them. I've had many of those conversations, but once it gets into the opportunity to create a capability or to buy a capability, we turn that over our J8. We have a big team focusing on that, and so those would be the Andrew Walker throws out, superpowers need to lead in the protection of commerce, as we do in the vital sea lanes to protect commerce and supply chains. Do you see this new command as an extension of that mission? Well, in many ways I do, Andrew, and I think I touched on that as I talked about where Billy Mitchell was in the post-World War I, thinking of air and sea. I think that's today where we are with space and cyberspace, where we've got to make sure that those capabilities to our commercial partners are available so that they can communicate, so that they can engage, and they can provide all nations, whether that is toys, whether that's food, you name it. And so we want to make sure that there's a free and open opportunity for everyone. This is not the United States trying to dominate space for the sake of that. This is who has a capability to put it in space, as long as we do that responsibly. And as more and more space gets congested and contested, when satellites are no longer working, we got to return those to Earth responsibly, or put them out in a responsible manner, so that they don't get in the way and we don't have what I talked about earlier in that Kessler effect. Because one satellite taking out another, or a piece of debris taking out another, can quickly lead to bad times in space, and potentially cellular phones, you name it. So Andrew, yeah, I do think that in many ways it's similar to in the sea lanes. Yes, sir.
So I had a question for myself. So it was about uncontrolled re-entries of some rockets, for example, Chinese or Russians. Does the U.S. Space Command plan anything in case of one of those rockets would land or fall in populated areas?
Yeah, so Tristan, great question. That has happened several times. It's happened a few times recently, where nations have what we believe is irresponsibly had things returning to Earth. And so to model and simulate where we expect that to land. We communicate as best we can with the country, with the community or the organization, commercially, that we think might be where we didn't know because it was spiraling out of control. We didn't know where it would land right up until close to the last moment. And so that's dangerous for obvious reasons. If that were to land in a highly populated area, that's horrible. But we also want to be able to predict that, because there may be a ship out at sea. There may be, grandma and grandpa on a sailboat out there, and we got to be able to restrict a certain space as debris returns. And so responsible behavior is not just about putting things in space responsibly, it's really as well. And that's something that's concerning too. So we use models and simulation to best predict. We don't always get it right. And so anyone that puts things in space, we're hoping that they do so responsibly, so that they can return it to Earth responsibly or put it out to die responsibly. Hopefully that answers your question, Tristan.
Yes, thank you. And then we have another question from Hector Falcon, who was wondering, how is US Spacecom approaching public and private partnerships with external entities, examples NCC, Space Isaac, and etc.?
Well, Hector's a teammate of mine. I got to see Hector retire recently. He's a great American, great teammate, and former Guardian in the Space Force. But I didn't ask him to ask me this, so this is a fair question here. We are approaching this as a true line of effort, which means we have leadership guiding us and directing us for these public and private partnerships, looking at where we can expand this. An example, and Hector knows this, but an example for everyone else on the net I would offer is we have what we call the integrated center. We have a center in one of our headquarters in California. And what we're trying to do is with more and more commercial partners so that they can sit on that watch floor and see what we see in real time, and be able to respond and provide capabilities to either deter that aggression, to predict better, you name it. And so we're looking more and more to do that. One of the outreaches and lines of effort that I've taken on is the academic one. And so wherever I can speak to universities such as Oxford or you name it, we take that on so we can educate the public at writ large about what we're doing. We also have right up the road here a thing called Catalyst Campus. And Catalyst Campus, in an unclassified manner, to bring industry in, to bring other organizations in, and keep an eye on what's happening in space. And an example of that is really on the 15th of November, again, when Russia took out one of their own satellites. And that happened. While we were watching this take place, and early in the morning watching this happen, it was a challenge for us to talk about it, because a lot of the things that we're seeing are classified. But because of this chip and some of the private partnerships that we have with the commercial partners working there at Catalyst Campus, they were able to publicly talk about what was happening, and confirm pretty much everything we were seeing, up to the second, up to the explicit details of what we were seeing there as well. And so these public and private partnerships with external entities are critical. I see them continuing to grow. One of the ways, again, that we continue to grow this is annually at our Space Symposium, where we have direct sit-down conversations with other countries and there's an academia to see where we can collaborate better, both to educate and inform, and then, quite frankly, to solve some of the challenges that we have. Society approach. Hopefully, Hector, that answers your question, sir.
I had another question, which was about how you or the command center work with the Department of Commerce or the 18th Space Defense Squadron. Like, for example, like, who is doing what is everyone's role?
Yeah, great
Thanks so much.
question. So a few years back, we had a National Defense Authorization Act that charged that we were going to turn over what we call some of the space traffic management responsibilities to the Department of Commerce. And so today, if you talked about the 18th, you would really focus on space domain awareness. They are the squadron. They are the unit that down to really explicit detail are able to track everything going on in space. But what we need for the Department of Commerce and what we need really for others is that space traffic management. And so, what is that? Think of the Federal Aviation Administration that doesn't necessarily know where every human, but they know where the airplanes are in space, at speed, at elevation. The Department of Commerce is going to take on, and they're working through this now, some with the help of us, some with the help of Space Force and others, where they can do space traffic management. So that, again, they know where the objects are. They may not necessarily know where every intricate detail of those are, of that satellite is, or piece of debris. And so the 18th will continue to focus on the exquisite detail. The Department of Commerce is going to take on some of the larger picture and think again, where's that aircraft? Where's that object in space? That's what they're going to take on.
And then I had a question about what happens if companies launch rockets from other nations. So, and accidents happens either in space or like on Earth. What would happen if those nations were unable to deal with a situation?
Well, this is a hypothetical. What would happen? I think the Kessler effect is an extreme option, a potential of what would happen. But if you can envision pre 1961, before we had a human in space, what life was like, there is a potential. I don't want to alarm anyone, but there's a potential that we could get a global economy in a world, if you will, pre-space, where we did not have the niceties we have television, the ability to call anyone anywhere on a cellular phone, the internet, where you basically have all of the information in the world at your fingertips, and so on and so forth. It's greater than that. It's the ability to withdraw money from an ATM machine, which requires precision navigation and timing. I don't know about you, but even when I'm going somewhere in my vehicle and I know how to get there, I'll often for live traffic, so that, hey, there's a traffic jam here, maybe I'll go around the bridge instead of through it, things like that. And so the ease that space has brought us, and the opportunities is incredible. That is the extreme answer to your question. I would like to think that because things are so far apart and moving at such a speed, that there would be a potential for, if something like that were to happen, hopefully just be a minor issue. But this is where we again need a whole of society and a focus on where if there is a defunct satellite, we are able to get rid of it, either returning it to the Earth's atmosphere and having it burn up, or putting it out further where it can't be a challenge. Some of these things we are working through our State Department and diplomatic means through the United Nations, so that there's responsible behavior in space and all nations agree to that responsible behavior. We're not quite there yet, but I think the leadership and the administration we have, at least in the United States government, is pushing for that, so that, Tristan, we don't get to a situation that you're talking about.
Thank you very much for your answer. We got another question from Patricia Jean Pardo. She was wondering if somehow all of the space debris could be collected, what would be the challenges to process it?
Yeah, so Patricia, thank you for that question. I don't know that we could ever, in one big scoop, pick up all of the debris. Again, today we're looking at over 45,000 objects in space, not all of it being debris. but an awful lot of it. Just from the 15th of November, where the Russians again took out their own satellite, just that event alone left over 1,000 pieces of debris. And so let's say you can gather all of that. There's options, right? One, it could be, is it returning to Earth, and is it burning up as it re-enters the atmosphere? That is potentially one. Again, this hasn't been fully tested phase here. Other options are, do they just take it out so far out into space in a different environment? I don't know. Is that something, we call, geosynchronous orbit, which is just over 35,000 kilometers and further out. That may be something that we'll have to look at. I don't think there's any capability today that we're even considering that would be able to collect it all. Process that is a fair question. We can't just have things crashing down to Earth or impacting the oceans and then using the oceans as a trash bin. And so we're going to have to think through the responsible behavior, not just of putting things in space, but collecting that and bringing it back in orbit. So Patricia, I think that's a good question. I think these pose the issues and challenges that we actually will push back to industry and academia and ask for the brilliant minds such as yourself to find ways to solve.
Thank you for your answer. I had a question about the use of laser in space. What's your thought on it, either to destroy debris or even just use them as weapons? What do you think about lasers?
Well, I would hope that we would look at lasers beyond the ability to use them for weapons and that sort of thing. But potentially, as we look at scenarios that Patricia brought up, to potentially use it if we have debris that we can either shape or put into a position where we can later collect it. Maybe lasers can be used that way. There's some things in this area that I won't be able to dive into, quite frankly, Tristan. So I would say, what all of that means and what that could do for you. I don't think we're in the Star Wars looking at lasers shooting out of guns and lightsabers, but maybe in the future. And I'll have to leave it at that. I apologize.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
I had a question because you studied cybersecurity and all that, and there's been a rise of using quantum communications. What's your thought on using quantum communication between satellites and all that?
Right. So, to the best of my knowledge, true quantum computing hasn't been fully realized yet. But here's the challenge: this does happen. Is most of the encryption today would be rendered null and void. Quantum computing has the potential to not just for national security, but if we're using end-to-end encryption just to communicate, to basically be able to capture and to break into any of that encryption. And so what has also been in conversation is not just but quantum resistant encryption. And so again, led by academia, led by industry, how are we going to create quantum resistant code, quantum resistant encryption, so that when and it's probably not a matter of if, it is probably a matter of when true quantum exists. Nation states can't basically take all of the encrypted items that we have and just read our national secrets, break into your bank and drain, name it. It is a great concern. It really is. And it's not just a concern for those of us in the intelligence community. It's a grave concern for banks, for private bankers, for partners, allies. It's something that we talk about both in classified settings, unclassified settings. But we're going to have to really figure out how we're going to deal with it, because as you understand, whether it's signals intelligence and different types of collection methods, you may be collecting a lot of things today that you can't decrypt, But if you hold that and then quantum computing is realized and that full capability exists, now you may be able to break what you've stored. So you really hit something that great concern to many of us, to senior leadership, because again, not just our national secrets that are out there, but simple end user text messaging, banking, all of the above could basically be open kimono to a variety of actors who have not so good intentions. So quantum resistant encryption is really where the conversation is today on how we step ahead of that, if possible.
All right, thank you very much. That was very interesting. I had a question about your thought on machine learning. Would it be useful to avoid collision in space, for example? And especially if you use it, how do you deal with it when it comes to who takes the responsibility for what the program or algorithm tells you?
Right, Tristan. So that question, because I think we overstate the applicability and the ability, if you will, of artificial intelligence, which is not truly fully realized, creating whatever it wants. We have machine learning, which you use consistently on our phones, where you may start typing something in and it knows that I type the letter E, it probably thinks I'm going to ESPN, and then it puts it in there. It has learned my habits. And so what we need to do with machine learning and space specifically are have software and are able to crosstalk so that it's able to learn. It's able to learn our habits. It's able to learn why at certain times of the day, a satellite, for example, so that we can update software. So maybe we just need to give it a break, you name it, or economically save money by not using it because it's over an area of the earth that we don't need it to collect on. Machine learning has unbelievable, certainly use it a lot in space. But when it comes to avoiding, objects, we still have a human in the loop, and I think we will for quite some time. But we have machines out there that are able to alert us. And I'll bring you back again to the 15th of November, which I've touched on many times in this conversation. We knew, because we have the 18th Space Defense Squadron, and we have other capabilities out there, that there was a potential that our astronauts, both U.S. and Russians on the international space, we knew that they were potentially in danger because of that debris that the Russians caused. We knew that because machines had informed us and alerted us. And so when the humans were in the loop, we then were able to alert NASA to say, this is potentially something to be concerned with. We're going to keep an eye on it. Luckily, we didn't have to evacuate the International Space Station. How we use machines and people together, humans in the loop there, that we're able to do that. I think there's unbelievable potential here, Tristan. And quite frankly, the mind is the limit there. If you can just expand your mind and what you can think of, there's all sorts of potential out there for machines to learn from us. But they've got to be able to collect infinite amount of data so that it continues to learn. If it's just given a little bit of data, it can't fully learn. And is why, again, as I go on my phone or my computer, if I type in E, it knows I do that so many times, boom, it's going right to ESPN for me. And we need machines to have that data similarly in space as well.
Thank you for your answer. We have a question from Andrew Walker. He asked, does Cyber Command fear apps with permissions like TikTok but are owned by Chinese company as collection threats?
So I'm not in Cyber Command anymore, and I will quite frankly tell you, the moment you leave such an elite organization like Cyber Command, you quickly find that you're not up to date anymore. Here's what I would offer when it comes to TikTok and why you've seen conversations in the media about the concerns here. several years ago, created a national defense law that basically said any company doing business in China or with China, at the time and place of parties choosing, will have to turn over the data. And so the idea is that TikTok, being a Chinese company, would have to turn over data. So if you are using TikTok, if you have an app or using it, potentially China can take your data. Well, some will say, hey, that's not a big deal. I just do dance videos or whatever on TikTok. Well, that's a simplistic view of what an application does, because more often than not, your apps are talking to other apps on your phone, and they're collecting. They may be linked to your phone, your camera. Now they have access to your photos and other videos. It may be connected. I don't know why it would be, but it might be connected to your bank. Maybe you're buying things on TikTok. I'm not on TikTok. I couldn't tell you how it's used from that perspective. And so the concern is not, this isn't about cyber command. This isn't about anything else. It's about a nation that potentially has access at the time and place they're choosing to the data that you have as a private individual, or companies that are using TikTok as well. And so I think what we need to do is not so much say this is a collection threat or whatever, and say, are you okay with a country being able to take your data, a country that has a history of potentially, using that data to silence internally. We can see the protests going on in China today. If you're in China and you were trying to find information about those protests, you would struggle to find that information. For those of us on the net here, we know what's going on because we've been able to see it. And so I think that the consumer make that decision, or the countries you're in can make that decision, obviously, for themselves as well. But they need to understand going in that it's not so much that it's TikTok. It's that the national security laws of China require TikTok to turn over all that data. And then it's up.
Thank you for your answer. I was wondering, with Orion, will the U.S. Space Command have a role of protection to play?
Would the United States Space Command have a role of protection?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. That's an easy one. And so one of our required roles, what we call UCP, so Unified Campaign Plan, which is basically what the President of the United States charges Space Command to do, is to be able to defend not just U.S. assets, but when charged, our partners and allies, potentially even commercial, if asked to do so, assets in space. Absolutely, that is a requirement. This is why we make brilliance as well, so that they can come out and help Space Command. But General Dickinson has that charge. We want to deter aggression first. We don't want that. We want, just like we talked about earlier, a free and open space, just like we want in the seas. Aggression should happen. Make no mistake, we have all the capabilities and the authorities to execute our mission to defend space-based capabilities. Partners and allies can have that for them. You're welcome, Andrew. I see that.
So now we will move to one last question. So I just want to thank you very much for all your excellent and interesting answers. So the last question will be, do you have any advice for students or young professionals who want to get into the aerospace sector?
Yes, I do. And let me tell you, Matilda and Tristan, I know Matilda is in the background there. First and foremost, thank you very much for this opportunity. And in the future, if we'd like to do this again in another forum, all you've got to do is reach out, and I'm in. What I would say as a father who has 3 young daughters, one who's going to turn 4, one who was born four weeks ago, and the other who's 2 years old, is to inspire them and to show them the great opportunities. I bring my daughters to work with me when I can on a weekend, just to show them how cool it is, and that are hanging from the wall like a satellite or a space shuttle, you name it. And then it's to dare them to dream big, to not confine them to our way of thinking, and kind of put a cap on that. I bring us back to, again, how Billy Mitchell thought of of sea and air differently. And he was thought of kind of as, wow, that's a crazy guy. These are just flying kites. As we know today, airplanes are a lot more than just flights. We've got to, in individuals in space, in math and science. But I would also offer in art. And the reason I say that is because the creativity of art is critical. One of the differences I see in our cyber professionals and those of other nations is we really focus not just on the mathematics and the science, which is critical, and the computer science, but also on the art to increase creativity. There are some countries out there that don't emphasize that enough. And it's more than just a checklist process of being a great cyber operator or a space operator. It's being understanding and visualizing. So getting young folks to the museums, the science museums. I just took my dinosaurs and all incredible how that was. And then looking at what motivates individuals. And that could be money, not going away. We talked about it's not new, but it's emerging and it's growing, and the opportunities are expanding. And so if you're driven by money, you're driven by the unknown, which is what really motivates me. Wow, I'd love to see what it's like to live on Mars and outside of our solar system, and see what's beyond that. Is there life out there? All of these things. Our children and our young people answer and solve those problems. And in many ways, the ability to explore, I don't know that there's a limit. It's just going to go on and on and on. And so inspiring them. And then when they struggle, mentor them, coach them, help them along the way. We've all struggled. Take a math test, you said, oh my goodness, I'm not smart enough for this. Well, yes, you are. You just need a few more sets and reps. And so we need to encourage other countries, other people, as best we can, and motivate them. We need the Hector Falcons that are out there who have served to inspire folks to serve as well. Folks like Tristan and Matilda to reach out to individuals like me and ask them to speak at things like this, so that we energize our young folks out there about the opportunities in space, and I would say cyberspace as well.
All right. Thank you very much for taking the time to come tonight. It was brilliant. So I hope you enjoyed it too, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Tristan, Matilda, and thank you everyone who joined us.